The Auditor General, Michael Ferguson, released his audit today into spending by both MPs and senators. Are parliamentarians actually spending your tax dollars wisely? Are there rules in place strict enough to ensure that they're actually exercising prudence? Joining me now is the Auditor General of Canada himself, Michael Ferguson. Good to have you back in the studio with me. You have a new report out today. Of all the things you found, and we'll get to some of them, it seemed to me the most serious concern, the most serious breach was the procurement issue. 41 of 59 procurements by the administration, which we examined, were not in compliance. Tell me how serious, what you found and why that's so serious.
Certainly, we tabled two reports today, one on the administration of the Senate and one on the administration of the House of Commons. Certainly the thing that I think is most concerning in the two reports was the practices that we found in terms of procurement in the House of Commons administration. As you indicated, we found 41 of the 59 items that we sampled where there were issues. Those issues ranged from contracts not being signed or contracts being signed late to the most significant item, which was one of $600,000 for a contract for professional services, where the organization that won that contract hadn't actually complied with the requirements in the original tender. Now, we've since been told by the administration that they've in fact canceled that contract and retendered it.
It says here the procurement manual requires that bids not meeting the mandatory technical or performance requirements not be included, and this $600,000 contract was. I guess the question is, you find this out, they say, well, it's been changed, but what allowed them in the system not to follow the rules, not to, as you say in this case, to award a $600,000 contract that didn't meet mandatory requirements? What about the system allowed that to happen?
We state in the report that overall we felt that they in fact had a good framework for procurement and purchasing. What they didn't have, though, was a manual that was clear, that was giving people clear guidance. We did also indicate that one of the reasons for that was that there had been significant turnover at senior levels in this area.
But is that, I'm just trying to understand that, and I know you've got to be careful with your language, but when 41 of 59 procurements are not in compliance with policy, can you write that off as turnover in the staff, or is it just blatant disregard for the law?
We didn't find anything in the work that we did that indicated that there was any wrongdoing going on or any of that type of thing. It was purely just you know, the administration in this area was not working the way that it was supposed to be working. But as you indicate, it was definitely serious. 41 out of 59 items were not in compliance with the rules, and that definitely is an area for concern.
But I'm only asking because how do we know what the problem is? And I'll just read, so it's the folks that may not read this report. The deficiencies we found: contracts were not signed or were signed retroactively, files that were missing documentation such as a statement of work or the rationale for not choosing a competitive process. Those are pretty serious. I imagine in some sectors, if you're signing things retroactively, that doesn't look good. You know, I mean, that, I don't know, it could be fraud, it could be all sorts of issues there. How do you know there's nothing more serious going on than, you know, why these people aren't following these laws, these regulations?
You know, again, each of those items is serious. It's something that should have been complying with the rules. It was not complying with the rules. As I said, this is the thing that we felt was the most concerning in the two reports that we issued. We've discussed it with the administration. The administration does agree. They admit that they've had these types of weaknesses in the whole procurement and purchasing area, and that it has to get better. So they take that responsibility.
I mean, if
on.
you didn't find this $600,000 contract, it would have just been awarded, right?
It had been awarded, and it was in place, and it wasn't until after we found it and we brought it to their attention that it was canceled.
Right. So the audit brings it to attention, then they cancel it. So how do Canadians now have confidence in the future if the framework's still there and they don't need to change the framework, that this framework will be followed in the future? Because, you know, you're not going to do another audit of this for years. So how do we know that they're not just going to return to the same sloppy practices that you found?
You know, again, certainly we've brought it to the attention of the administration and also now made it public. So I think there's an expectation on the part of the administration that they will fix this problem.
You also examined the Senate, and there are questions about how senators, for example, report their costs. An example, if a senator takes a trip to Washington, they write their report of what they spent their expenses on. How do we know that what they say their expenses were for, business, wasn't basically for something else? I don't know, maybe they went out to dinner for personal reasons. Maybe they went to a show and they're charging the taxpayers. How do we know their expenses are for what they did? Who checks that?
The administration in the Senate is responsible for checking to make sure the rules are being properly applied. So there are rules in place. Those rules have to be applied, and it's the administration's job to make sure that happens. And they have to do that on a day-to-day basis. So it's important that the administration, whether it be of the Senate or the House of Commons, be doing that, because they're in fact the gatekeepers to make sure that the expenses are right.
What about this, the expense claims are often on the honor system? Is that right? Can you explain what the honor system is and perhaps the potential weaknesses involved in terms of MPs or senators' expense claims?
I think the main thing in terms of the honor system is that the MPs and the senators are all supposed to only spend this money for parliamentary business. And they have to sign off on every single claim that what they did was for parliamentary business. So they are putting their name on the line saying that, yes, this expense was something that was incurred for parliamentary business. And I think that's fundamentally what the honor system was about.
Is it, in this day and age, is that enough transparency and accountability, enough check and balance for the taxpayer? I mean, is that system sufficient?
You know, again, I think you have to understand that there are significant rules that have to be applied and have to be complied with. We didn't do an actual assessment of all the rules, although we didn't identify anything in the rules that was that we would have said was a significant problem. But there are rules that they have to comply with in the various categories of expenses.
Some may wonder, after your report on the F-35 and talking about procurement, this is very different, of course. That was procurement issues surrounding military procurement. You're talking about procurement on services with the administration here. But is there a fundamental problem in your mind, after doing some of these audits, with the process of procurement? Who's following the rules?
Procurement is something that that needs to be done very carefully. It's very important. People expect procurement rules to be followed to make sure that there is fairness in that procurement process. You know, again, it was the area of the most concern for us in these two audits.
One final thing on MP's expenses. You know, you've been reading the news about, for example, Minister Bev Oda, you know, the $16 glass of orange juice, or the refunding more than $4,000 of taxpayers' money for a trip to London. Again, that was only found out through access to information. It was difficult to find. Do you think that there's enough transparency, or the rules are sufficient to make sure the taxpayer knows what the MPs or the senators are spending on, and to make sure they're telling them, the public, the truth?
First of all, I think, just to be clear, this audit did not cover ministers' expenses. This audit only covered expenses going through the administrations. In terms of the transparency, you know, again, that's something that we touched on, at least in the report, and said that we felt that there were areas where they could improve in some of the transparency. For example, providing information about the budgets for each of the members, and providing information about the travel point system.
In the 41 of the 59 procurements of the administration you examined, can you give us the total of how much those procurements would have added up to? In other words, what was the cost of those?
I don't have the exact cost. I think the total amount that we sampled of the 59 was probably somewhere around $15 million, but I don't have the total amount of the 41. I know one of the items, one of the larger items that didn't have a conflict of interest document signed at the right point in time was one of the larger items.
Right. So, so $15 million that you examined, and 41 or 59 weren't properly done. So a very interesting report. Now, there's other reports, as you say. That's the concern following today's report. Good to have you back on the program, sir. Always is.
Thank you.